Hello folks, you join me far away in my kitchen of doom. How you doing? Now I've got the wide lens on this. Hello, the wide angle. Because we're going to be cultivating some yeast, and we're going to be cultivating some yeast from these bottles here. Now these are the Cooper's Brewery Sparkling Ales, and these 4 bottles here have been in the fridge for over a week now, just to make sure that the yeast settles to the bottom of the bottle. Now when I bought them from Waitrose, they were £1.53 each, so I treated myself. And you could see the yeast floating in the beer, because these are bottle conditioned beers. So what we're going to be doing is pouring off the bulk of the yeast into this decanter, which I've rinsed out. It's all nice and clean. And then we're going to give it a little bit of a taste test in the HBW glass. Sounds good, that, doesn't it? So we need to be careful when we're opening these, because we want to make sure that we can put the lids back on. Because once I've decanted most of the beer down to about there, I'm going to put the lid back on and put them back in the fridge for a bit while I get the malt extract on the stove, boiling up, ready and cooled, so that we can then pour the yeast into the solution that we want to grow those yeasties up on the stir plate with. So let's give this a little bit of an open, folks. As I said, I'm going to be a little bit careful. Just open it up slowly. There we go. Now I've been told that these are twist lids, but it doesn't really matter. I'm pouring one directly into here, and the rest I'm going to pour into the decanting vessel, because I want to try this and see what it tastes like. I can just see the yeast starting to come out now. So as you can see, folks, just at the bottom there, I don't know if you can see it, but there's probably about 2 fingers worth of beer and yeast. So I'm just going to put the lid back on. That'll do. It is a screw top. So let's try and unscrew this then. Oh yeah, we can unscrew it. That's handy, isn't it? So the rest I can put into here. Just pour it carefully. And of course, when you start seeing the yeast come up through the glass, you want to stop it. There we go. Put that back on. Very strange, isn't it? These lids, they're they're sort of screwable, cappable lids. Yeah. So we'll unscrew this one. Oh, that's a bit tighter, that one. And we'll do the same. We'll just pour it into here. Decant most of it. Here we go. And the yeast is starting to come out now, so put the lid back on, screw that on. That's it. A bit of a bug of it. One more to go. There's a bit of sediment in this one. I might not be able to get all of it, but I don't worry too much, because I can see there is some at the bottom of the bottle. So it just goes to show, you know, you can leave these bottles in the fridge for over a week and you still get sediment coming out when you pour. So there's my beer. I'm going to be drinking that later. But more importantly, there's me Cooper's Australian Sparkling Ale. Unfortunately, it doesn't tell me the ABV on here. I've been trying to look for it. Ah, there it is, in small writing, 5.8%. So it's quite a strong ale. What can we smell? It smells like, you know what it smells like? It smells like a Cooper's homebrew. So that's very strange, isn't it? It smells like a Cooper's homebrew. But that's not necessarily a bad thing, folks, you know? Let's give it a taste. Very clean and crisp and malty. Can't really smell or taste too much hoppage going on in there. I guess it's kind of, it's like a strong lager. It tastes like a strong lager. There's not too much going on in the way of hoppage, but it's a perfectly decent drink. Would I buy it again? Probably not. I like to do things a little bit differently and inject some flavours into my ales, and I can't really taste an awful lot inside this. It's a little bit bland. It's more of a lager, close to a cerveza really, but it's just got a strong malty taste at the back end that you don't get when you do a cerveza. It's very crisp and clear though. It's nice enough. It's, you know, it's refreshing. Yeah, if I'd brewed that, I wouldn't be too disappointed. I think it's okay. It's a little bit bland. I'd be thinking I need to put some hops in there, which is a little bit unlike me, folks, isn't it? Because when I started out doing brewing, if you go back sort of 8 months or so ago on the brewing videos, you'll see that I wasn't really into hops at all. And so this is a new venture for me to do hoppy beers, but I'm really enjoying, you know, the beers that people are sending me. I had an IPA that Mark very kindly sent me, the Razorback IPA, the Festival Ale kit. It was very nice. Really enjoyed that. So yeah, I'm getting more of a sort of hoppy profile on the tongue now where I'm able to drink these hoppy beers. So what I'm going to do now, folks, stick these back in the fridge of doom, and get my malt extract on the stove, and we'll go from there. Alright, so I'll see you in a bit. So here you go, folks. Here's our flask. As you can see, there's a little stir bar in there. This has been sanitised with Star San. There's a little bit of Star San in there, but I'll pour that out before we start. Here, I've got roughly 650 ml of water. And here, I've got a pan in which I'm going to boil it up. And there, I've got a previously used packet of malt extract. A little bit of a tip for you: when you fold it over, use some pegs to keep the seal into place if you haven't got any sort of sellotape lying around. And what tends to happen is you'll get some yeast extract on the outside, and it gets a bit sticky, as you can see there. Well, the pegs will keep it in place, but obviously sellotape won't stay in place because of that nasty stickiness stuff. So just a little bit of a tip for you. So let's get this going on the stove. Right, so here we are, folks. The water has more or less come to a boil. I've got my ½ cup of malt extract there, which I'm going to chuck in there. And we're going to use a metal spoon just to give that a little bit of a stir around. Excellent. Remember to put your pegs back on your malt extract so you don't get any moisture in there, and it should keep fresh. That goes back on the stove. We go over here and we set the timer for 15 minutes and we let it go. Here we are then, folks. We're roughly at the end. We've got about 4, 3, 2, 1 seconds. Hey. There's a little alarm that says, Roy, we're done, mate. So what we're going to do now is we're going to pour this very carefully into our Erlen Mayo flask. Now, you need to make sure you use borosilicate glass flask. What that means is the glass is made specifically so that it can withstand extreme changes in temperature, so that you can pour in a boiling hot wort into a flask like this. But then what we need to do is cool it down. So The easiest way to do that is to pour it. Oh, I don't want to pour it, do I? I don't want to pour it anyway, I want to leave it in there. But the easiest way to do it is to fill the sink up with water, cold water, and put it in there for a bit. So let's do that. So here we are, folks. Our flask is sitting in some cold water with some ice thrown in, and that will bring the temperatures down to a reasonable enough temperature so that we can then pitch the yeast. Right, it's only a few minutes later, but I wanted to just show you something here. You need to measure the temperature, so what you need is like something like this, a thermometer kind of thing. Whoops. As you can see, it's measuring the temperature in the room at the moment at around about 70 odd degrees. We need this wort to be around about 80 or below before we can pitch any yeast into it. So let's give it a go. Now this has been star sand, folks. This stick that I'm sticking in to the wort there has been star sand. So we just leave it in there for a few seconds, take it out, have a little read. What's it reading? 103. Way too hot. We need to get that down to around about 80. Okay? Hello folks, well we're back. We've got the temperature right in the wort there. So all we need to do now is take the lids off the 4 bottles of, oh, I'm going to need to use a little bit of a towel on this one because it's a bit of a tight one. Let's get that one off. So we've got the lids off of these, and don't forget what we need to do is to give them a little bit of a shake like that to make sure we get all the yeast off the bottom, because we don't really want to be mucking about trying to get the yeast off afterwards. So pour that one in. There we go, that's one. Do the same with the next one. Give it a good old shake. Make sure we get the yeast off the bottom, and give it a little bit of a tilt so you can see that the yeast has actually come off the bottom there. Chuck it in. Now of course you're going to get some beer in here, but it's only going to be relatively small amounts, so don't worry about it too much. That's good. Here we go, and one more, the final one. Give that a little bit of a shake and get those yeasties in to our starter. The final thing we need to do is turn on the stir plate. So here we go. Now obviously I've already thrown in the stir bar into there, so we should expect to see some action. I don't know if you can see any action there at all. Should be kicking off any second there. Here we go, the top of the foam is just about spinning round, so we know that's working. And all we do now is we take a little bit of foil which has been star sand. You can probably see it's damp from star sand. Chuck that over the top like that. Leave that going, and as you can see we've got a little bit of a mini tornado going on in there, which is absolutely fantastic. That's exactly what we want, and we'll leave that for 36 to 48 hours and we'll come back to it, and hopefully we should have a decent amount of yeast before we do the same process over again, because if you step it up in this fashion from a 1 litre starter to a 2 litre starter, you'll get more yield, you'll get more yeast rather than starting with a 2 litre starter straight away. Hopefully that will make sense to you. Here we are then folks, this has been in the fridge for a day. I've just basically stuck it in the fridge to make sure that the yeast settles at the bottom there. So this is the litre starter, so what I'm going to do now is make a start on the 2 litre starter, for which I'm going to be pouring this juice off and then chucking in the yeast at the bottom there. Here we are then, we've got 1.3 litres of water there on the stove, and over here I've got 1 cup of dry malt extract. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to chuck all that in there. Bulk of that's off. Give that a little bit of a stir around. There we go. So basically we're just following the same procedure as we did initially. Okay, so we go over here, put the starter on, 15 minutes, we'll come back. Right, so there's our sanitised with Star San 2 litre Erlenmeyer flask, and the malt has finished. It's been going for 15 minutes, of course, so let's pour that in there. Obviously try and do it a little bit careful, folks. There we go, the bulk of that's in there. The rest is on the desktop, we won't worry about that too much. And now what we've got to do, of course, is we take this and we put it into the sink. We'll fill this up with cold water, put some ice in there as we did previously. So there's our 2 litre starter sitting in an ice bath. You have to be careful with this though, folks, because you don't want to put too much water in, because that will start floating and it will tip up and then you'll get water in your starter or it will leak. You can get weights that you put around the top of these that weighs them down, but you don't really need to do that. It's not absolutely necessary, as long as you put just enough water in there to cover where the malt extract finishes. You know where the line is down there. You see what I mean? There, just to cover it up. Then it will sit still. It will be quite happy in there. And we'll come back, check the reading on there, the temperature. We need it around about 80 degrees or below. It would probably take about 10 minutes or so to cool down. Right, so we've got the 2 litre vial at the right temperature now. As you can see, as you can see here, I've poured off most of the liquid and we've just got the remnants at the bottom. So all that's left to do is to chuck that in there. Obviously the stir bar's gone in there with it. And we're done, and we stick it on the stir plate. So here we are then, guys and girls. This is roughly 28 hours, 28 hours after we kicked off this second starter. As you can see, there was some activity during the night. So we know the yeasties are active in there and they're thriving. So I'm going to throw in a little bit of a yeast nutrient this morning to make sure that the yeast gets a decent enough chance to survive and thrive in there. And maybe at some point just a tiny little bit of sugar, but you know, that's not really necessary, because I think we're okay. Okay, so what we've got here, obviously we've got a big pot, and as you can see in there we've got some kilner jars. That's going to go on the boil for about 10 to 15 minutes. We want to sanitize those jars because we're going to be putting the finished yeast into those jars when we're done. So here we have it then, folks. The yeast has been poured into these kilner jars. Obviously there's some headspace in that one. Can't really do very much about that because I can't find a kilner jar the right size. But you know, it doesn't really matter at the end of the day, because as long as we keep it in the fridge, it'll be absolutely fine. These lids need to be airtight, by the way, and sometimes when you open them they can be an absolute bugger. So what I did when I poured the yeast from this, as you can see there's definitely been fermentation there. When I poured the yeast from this into the vials, I made sure I give it a really good stir between pouring to make sure I got all the yeast in suspension. Otherwise you're going to end up with one of these vessels, probably that one, it's going to have more yeast in it than the others, obviously, because there's more volume, but you might end up with an unequal amount of yeast in each vial otherwise. So you just want to make sure when you pour it into your jars, you give it a good old swirl in between pouring to make sure that you get an equal amount of yeast, basically. Alright, and that's it. These go in the fridge and you drag them out when you need them. This one, I imagine, we won't need to do a starter with, but we probably will anyway. We'll basically pour off the bulk of the juice it's not even juice, is it? It would be juice if it was apple, but you know, the bulk of the malt extract, liquid there, and yeah, we'll chuck it into a starter. Always do a starter because it will mean that you get more yeast basically, and you've got more chance of getting a decent beer. All right, that's it for me, folks. See you later.